unto God's commandments. Our first scripture is from Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Then Moses said to the people, obey all the laws that I am teaching you. Obey them faithfully, and this will show the people of other nations how wise you are. When they hear of all these laws, they will say, what wisdom and understanding this great nation has. The second reading is from Psalm 78, verses 1 through 6. And this speaks to us directly as well. Listen, my people, to my teaching and pay attention to what I say, the psalmist writes. We will not keep them from our children. We will tell the next generation about the Lord's power and his great deeds and the wonderful things he has done. In the third reading, Matthew 5:17 and verse 19, our Lord says, do not think that I have come to do away with the law of Moses and the teachings of the prophets. I have not come to do away with them, but to make their teachings come true. So then, whoever disobeys even the least important of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be the least in the kingdom of heaven. On the other hand, whoever obeys the law and teaches others to do the same will be great in the kingdom of heaven. Our reflections. These scriptures make it crystal clear that we have to do the following. First of all, we have to know the law, the commandments and teachings of God for ourselves. And Lent is an excellent time to become more familiar with the Word of God, so that we can fast from a favorite TV program and spend more time reading our Bibles. Secondly, we need to obey the law of God for ourselves. And my challenge to you and to all of us this morning is, how faithful am I? How obedient am I? What kind of life am I living? Is it pleasing to God? And the third thing, after we know and we obey, is to teach the law to others urgently. Let us be able to follow your leadership in the path of righteousness, right living. So as you speak words of truth, be quick to build up rather than tear down. We need strength to persevere in these critical times, and strength comes from unity. Having the mind of Christ together, as the psalmist says, tell the next generation about the Lord's power and his great deeds and the wonderful things he has done. I call on all of us to make every day a national day of prayer, to get down on our knees as a people and cry out to the Lord for healing and help, to walk in prayer through the course of the day, consulting the Lord along the way. Share what God is doing in your life and feel the pain of those around you and meet the needs as best you can. God is faithful, and so must we. Let us pray. Lord our God, in these difficult and confusing times, we pray for wisdom to see your way. We pray for courage to obey your word. And we pray for strength to be faithful to the end. Lord, you have called each one of us to serve in our various capacities for such a time as this. Help us, Lord, to rise to the occasion, to meet the challenges head on. And when time comes for each of us to die, help us to have no regrets that we worshiped gods other than you, the one true living God, and no regrets that we misled others by our actions, attitudes, and our instruction. Lord, bless us individually and as a people. And so we pray, expressing the rest of our petitions in our family prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
Thy will be done
on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended on the 20th of March, in the order of business, we were at statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I would have spoken to the side opposite. We do seek to go back on the agenda just to laying of documents by ministers. I believe I have the concurrence of the other side, but we'd like to just go back because we're at statements and communications by ministers. But we need to go back to the laying of documents by ministers, which is usually the first item on the agenda.
Thank you, honorable member. Her Majesty's loyal opposition. Do you concur to go back to on the agenda to laying of documents?
Fine, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Securities Industry Corporate Governance Rules 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table the Immigration General Amendment Regulations 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table the Immigration Fees Amendment Regulations 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following, the Road Traffic Amendment Regulations 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
None, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Statements and communications by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, can we have a little break? We were expecting another document. Can the House just suspend for 5 minutes? So I move that the House suspends for about 5 minutes or so until we get that document.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspend for approximately 5 minutes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended for approximately 5 minutes. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended, we were at laying of documents by ministers on the order of business. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further laying of documents. We will proceed.
Thank you, honorable member. Statements and communications by ministers. Just before we proceed, it has come to my attention that there was a very unfortunate and tragic incident in front of one of our schools. And at this time, I will call on the Minister for Education, the member for South Beach, before we proceed with statements and communications by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach.
May it please the Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was advised by a communication from the Royal Bahamas Police Force by Mr. Andrew Dean, principal of the T.A. Thompson Junior High School. At approximately 3 o'clock, shortly after 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, 26th of March, the young man who suffered his untimely demise, Mr. Perry Roll, I think is his name, is Perry Roll. 15 years of age, who was walking home in the Pitt Road area when he was accosted by two young men who are students at the C.C. Sweeting School. The two young men, one of which was in possession of a knife, and handed the knife to the other young man and directed him to stab the victim, which the young man did several times about his body, one of which was in his chest. The victim was taken to the hospital and succumbed to his wounds sometime later. I was further advised by the Royal Bahamas Police Force that they now have in their protective custody two young men, one 15 years of age and one 16 years of age, both students at C.C. Sweeting School. I was further advised by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, Honorable Speaker, that for some time they have been dealing with challenges of gang violence within the community that houses the students of T.G. Glover, T.A. Thompson, and C.C. Sweeting. And that the students of these three schools live in the Baintown or the Angliston School area. And that they have marshaled their resources to assist in the intervention of this most sordid circumstance in which our students find themselves. They are unable and were not willing at the time of our conversation, Mr. Speaker, to suggest or indicate that this incident may have been gang-related. That investigation continues. This morning, I led a team of Ministry of Education officials to both T.A. Thompson Junior High School, where I met with the mother, grieving mother, and her family of the victim, and offered our support, prayerful sympathies, and condolences. And I spoke further to the assembly of students, teachers, and administrators. What was particularly grieving and heartbreaking for me, Mr. Speaker, was I was directed and ushered into a room of students. About 9 young men and 3 young women who were all crying uncontrollably and who were all witnesses of this most unfortunate and tragic event. So uncontrollably and inconsolably that they were unable to speak to me or the counselors who had gathered at that time, young men and young women. And I spoke further to now the very somber assembly of young people at T.A. Thompson. Teachers and students all crying across the campus because of this situation. I left a little bit later after having spoken to the administrators. Mr. Andrew Dean is the principal, and went to C.C. Sweeting, where again, staff and students are traumatized because 2 of their students were involved in this incident. We have ordered and requested that grief counselors beginning yesterday afternoon and continuing today and as for long as necessary, be at the school and provide whatever support and assistance that is required for the students and the staff. I'm also advised that the Royal Bahamas Police Force has what is known as a family liaison section, who now has sprung into action to also give further support to those families, both family of the victim and the family of those suspected of having committed this act.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Further statements and communications by ministers.
No further statements or communications, Mr. Speaker.
Any offering at this time by the official opposition?
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Angleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. It was unexpected, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity because the child in question, who is no longer with us, comes from a family in the Wilson Track area. Who was wearing a uniform, who has been killed through, who has died through violence. And it raises, Mr. Speaker, this is why, I think that on the issue of crime, we use it politically to point fingers and then we claim it as brownie points. But the truth is we're dealing with an endemic social issues in this country, levels of violence that are sickening beyond belief, and that are affecting children. We recall the little boy who was in his home, I think it was in the Farrington, or the Chippingham area, who was doing his homework, who was killed by a stray bullet. Children are being killed in this terrible environment. I heard the minister indicate that it appears that there's some gang-related components. This is speaking very terribly to what is happening in our country with our young people. And it requires all hands on deck. It is not a political issue. It's not a police issue. The police have a very limited role. I noticed we seem to think that the police are the panacea. They're not. They have one role. They're law enforcement. And in urban renewal, they're supposed to have some proactivity in prevention. But it's a much deeper, wider issue than the police. And the Bahamas is a wonderful country, Mr. Speaker. But the levels of violence we are experiencing is dismal. It's speaking very poorly to the diminishing of quality of life in this country and our cultural norms as a people. And so to the family of this boy, this 15-year-old boy in Wilson Track, his mother, I extend heartfelt condolences on my own behalf as the political representative, but also on behalf of members of the opposition, to this mother and to this community, which has now lost a second child through violence within the parameters of a school environment or proximate to a school environment. And I think that we have to, I think Michael Jackson has a song, The Man, the Mirror. Speaker, we have to look in the mirror. We could claim as politicians we are this, that, great, wonderful, and all these things. But at the end of the day, we have to come to terms with what is actually happening on the ground in our country. And we have to come together as a people to address and redress the challenges that we're facing, especially amongst children. When you see this happening to children, Mr. Speaker, you know that we are experiencing something that's a very serious phenomenon. And so I trust that coming out of this incident, that we're able to prevent this type of horrible, tragic. We remember the Doris Johnson incident. You know, and you know, Speaker, just before I said, you know, in England they're having a resurgence of knife incidents, knifing, and we have to watch this because the incident with children tend to be I think they all are knifing incidents, and there has to be a way for us to find a way to ensure that these children are not coming to school with knives or leaving the school with knives or are in the school zone with knives. And then we have to ensure, I feel sorry to say this because I'm one of those people, Mr. Speaker, I didn't really support the police in the schools. I didn't support that. You know, but I think we have to find a way to ensure that children are safe going to and from school. It's a human right to access education without being killed, Speaker. And so we extend condolences to this mother, Speaker, and we pray that no other mother in this country has to face this kind of fate.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Further statements and communications? Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to offer condolences to the communities of Angliston and also the community of Baines and Grantstown. It's always a pleasure when the voices of the people can be heard and represented. Petitioning Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is a long-established fundamental right of all citizens. It allows any individual or group to place their grievances before the Parliament. It is actually one of the few direct means of communication between the people and the Parliament. A petition, Mr. Speaker, is a request for action. Petitions in this House of Assembly have been a while coming, with one of the most notable of those being the petition of Dame Doris Johnson and Mary Ingram and others for the rights of women and others. So petitions are not about who is right, but it's about what is right.
Honorable Member.
Oh, yes, Mr. Speaker.
We are at the stage of the presentation of the petition, not the explanation of it.
Good.
So if you would
move right into the presentation.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just thought it would have been valuable to the citizens of the country to know what it's about. So today, I will be presenting a petition to the Honorable Speaker and members of the Honorable House of Assembly. This petition seeks to draw the attention of this Honorable House the need for a competent authority, preferably a ministry, to manage and administrate the natural resources of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and for the enforcement of the law authorizing the establishment of the Sovereign Wealth Fund and its related purposes. Your petitioners, Mr. Speaker, do make requests and state as follows. Whereas we believe that utilizing our natural resources in the public interest can bring considerable wealth, job and food security, sustainable ecological development, as well as increased domestic and global business and innovations to the country. And whereas we cannot find any strong regulatory framework or competent institutional bodies for heightened good governance to protect, preserve, and transparently manage the country's natural resources and related revenues in the public's interest. And whereas we cannot find any evidence of sustainable extractions and consumptions, contract transparency, fair distribution, accurate revenues tracking, and dependable records management in support thereof in the public interest. And whereas we believe that with a strong regulatory framework and transparent controls, the proceeds and the extractive sector will significantly aid in greater parity financially, socially, and environmentally in the public interest. We, the undersigned, call upon the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to establish a competent authority in law to eliminate the deficiencies complained of in the above recital. And as in duty bound, we will, your petitioners, continue to pray therefore. Mr. Speaker, the petitioners are as follows: Prescott Smith, Andros, Athena Gay, New Providence; Sean Williams, New Providence; Valentino Monroe, Stanyard Creek, Andros; Tracy Thompson, New Providence; Larry Bowleg, New Providence; Andrew Roll, New Providence; Latina Ferguson Hall, The Forest, Exuma; Reno DeVoe Sr., New Providence; Brent Williamson, New Providence; Yvonne Roll, Old Bight, Cat Island; Tomiko Colley, New Providence; Lloyd Bowleg Sr., New Providence; Nahaja Black, New Providence; Denez Jones; Matthew Town, Inagua; Ian Smith, New Providence; Paula Gibson, New Providence; Anthony Archer, New Providence; Dina Feast, New Providence; Dana Munnings, New Providence; Paul Moss, New Providence; Carla Colebrook, New Providence; Indira Martin, New Providence; Lenroy Roll, New Providence; and finally, in accordance with the rules, Mr. Speaker, number 25, Pedro Smith, New Providence. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker and Honorable House of Assembly.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the petition be brought up. Order that the petition do lie on the table. Further presentations of petitions, presentations of reports of committee, adoption of reports of committees, first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time: the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Multinational Entities Financial Reporting Amendment Bill 2019.
Further, first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table for a first reading the Immigration Amendment Bill 2019. Just as a heads up, this introduces a new section of visa, which is the BH-1B visa and the BH-4S visas, which are in compliance with the Commercial Enterprise Act, which are more towards techie persons coming in to do technological work in the Bahamas under the Commercial Enterprise Act, and to regularize the category of persons like chairman, directors, shareholders, accountants, who don't need to have visas. So there's clarity at the airport so people don't get taken away. Not allowed to come in without a work visa. I beg leave to lay on the table for the first reading.
Is there a second now?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a first time. Immigration Amendment Bill 2019. As many as are in favor will... Honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador.
I note that the minister laid this morning an amendment to the regulation to the Immigration Act. Which speaks to the very amendment to the Startup Act. So I don't know whether this is the appropriate exercise to lay regulation when there's no statutory foundation. You know, the powers, and then I'm also concerned about it being done under the Immigration Act, and then we're talking about the Commercial Enterprises Act, whether there's been any alignment of the two, and where we could find the link between the two.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
I'm advised by the clerk of the House and others that it is an appropriate way. The regulations are to amend the regulations under the Act, which does provide for a category. The bill, and also the other one was to provide for the categories you're talking about. The bill will actually introduce, understand, and I'm advised that because the Superior Act, the Immigration Act, does exist, amending the regulations under that is not out of place at this particular time. The second issue which you asked about was the Commercial Enterprise Act. The Commercial Enterprise Act, by its schedule, has a certain schedule of designed industries that are, that is giving a permit under those sections. So you have to fall under that section in order to qualify for this visa. So I hope I've answered your question.
It's very comes about because I'm not questioning the power or function to amend the regulations. The Act does give that power. But here you're amending the rules, right? Without a statutory basis, because the statutory basis is coming after through the amendment.
As and when we want to. So, I mean, I'm advised that that's an appropriate way to do it. At the end of the day, it's the same difference.
Honorable members, just on a note so that as we move forward, all members would be aware. Can you be quicker, all members, can you be quicker to your feet when you want to make an intervention as opposed to in the middle of when the question is being put? Because usually, according to the rules, no intervention should be made at that time. In other words, when the chair begins to put the question, it is usually too late to make an intervention. But in the past, and up to this point in time, the chair has been exercising its discretion in favor of members and actually stopping in the middle of putting the question and beginning all over again after the intervention. But just for future, if all members could please get to their feet much quicker than we have been doing in the past, so that the interventions can be entertained prior to the questions being put. So it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for first time. A bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provision for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Immigration Act to make provision for the BH-1B work visa and the BH-4S permit to provide for work visa exemptions and for connected matters.
Further first reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me at the outset offer my sincere condolences to the mother and father and family of the young man who would have tragically lost his life yesterday. It is a tragedy both for the victim and the perpetrators of the act, because henceforth they will be forever branded with such an incident. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the family that, and I know it's very difficult to make this statement at this time, that earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot cure. But it is truly the reality of our human existence. And eventually, with the passing of time, we come to that realization. But Mr. Speaker, I arise today in this hallowed place giving praise, again always to the Lord of life, Yahweh Elohim. Mr. Speaker, there are those who often chide me for this, but I'm a creature of habit.
A good habit, I might say.
And Mr. Speaker, he's known to the ancients as the Elohim of Elohim. It is imperative that as we enter this season of new birth, new growth, new life, that we recognize, Mr. Speaker, this time of Passover and recent Christian tradition, Easter. And as we move through this times of reflection and fasting during this Lenten season, I'm reminded in the story of Passover that all men at various stages of life are reminded by the good Lord that in this life, for the mother, father of that young man, that we have troubles, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. That, Mr. Speaker, we ought not to dwell and live in Crucifixion Friday, but that we should remember that if we would only journey on and realize that our hope is just around the corner, that indeed, Mr. Speaker, we will come to Resurrection Sunday. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, as my grandma always used to say, we serve a true and living God. Mr. Speaker, the season of spring in which we are now in denotes upward and forward movement, hearkening back to our national motto that says forward, onward, upward, together. In like manner, Mr. Speaker, I stand here today with a quantum leap forward in our legislative agenda. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, will take us forward along the road that preserves our nation's blood and treasure. Mr. Speaker, it is legislation for life. It is legislation to save lives. But Mr. Speaker, before I get into the meat and substance of the bill before us and the regulations that I signed and tabled here earlier, I will speak to the continuing rising fortunes of the people of Bamboo Town, whose lives are being enhanced right now through infrastructural improvements in the community, including our parks and playground programs, our aggressive road repair program, our aggressive drainage well cleaning program, our environmental focus and cleanup campaign of derelict vehicles, and our attention to the utility issues for both residents and businesses alike. Mr. Speaker, I thank the people of Bamboo Town again for affording me this opportunity, as I'm often fond of doing in this place. For Mr. Speaker, it is for them and Bahamians everywhere that I press on in this place to see that they receive that which they are so entitled to. Mr. Speaker, I also again would like to thank my leader, the most honorable member for Kalani, who was entrusted a challenging remit to me, that of the Ministry of Transport and Local Government. And with my executive team and staff, Mr. Speaker, we work diligently towards fulfilling the larger agenda of this government and of his government. Mr. Speaker, I will now return to the substantive motion on the floor of this House. What is important to me, Mr. Speaker, is that we frame the current discussion using both global and national facts. It is reported that globally approximately 1.2 million persons die of vehicular accidents each year. That equates to about 3,288 persons dying each day, 137 persons dying each hour, and 3 persons dying each minute around the globe as a result of accidents. Mr. Speaker, it's equivalent really to a plague. In fact, when we examine the number of vehicular deaths from the 1970s to the present day as compared to any other period in history, we will see that more people have died from vehicular deaths than from any of the major plagues that have occurred on this planet throughout the course of human history. Mr. Speaker, the 15-year plague of Galen that began in 165 AD killed some 2,000 people a day in the city of Rome. And at the end, Mr. Speaker, they had nearly 11 million persons died. The Great Plague of Europe that first occurred between 1347 and 1351 was responsible for the so-called Black Death of Europe, and it was responsible, Mr. Speaker, for some 75 to 200 million people. But Mr. Speaker, worse than these. If we were to look closely at the World Health Organization statistics, we will see that road traffic crashes rank 9th among the leading causes of death globally, and about 2.2% of all deaths on the planet. They are the leading cause of death amongst young children and young adults, ages 5 to 29 years. And each year, more than half of the deaths occur among young adults, ages 15 to 22. And 90% of these victims, Mr. Speaker, are in low and middle income countries with less than half of the world's vehicles. Each year, an additional 20 to 50 million people, Mr. Speaker, are injured or disabled, which has an even more devastating impact on families and economies. Road crashes, Mr. Speaker, cost all nations globally some $518 billion US dollars, which equates to 1 to 2% of individuals' governments' annual GDP. In simple terms, Mr. Speaker, road crashes cost low and middle income countries about $65 billion annually. And that amount, Mr. Speaker, exceeds the total amount received in global developmental assistance. Mr. Speaker, unless action is taken, road traffic injuries are predicted to become the 5th leading cause of death by 2030 globally. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Theodos Amahon Gaberis, the Director General of the World Health Organization, says that these deaths are an unacceptable price to pay for mobility. And Mr. Speaker, I agree. We can never be satisfied, Mr. Speaker, when more people die from road-related injuries than from HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis or diarrheal disease globally. Mr. Speaker, that is the global picture. On the national level here in the Bahamas, during the first 3 months of 2018, the deaths due to vehicular traffic accidents reportedly, Mr. Speaker, in the first 3 months equal the amount of homicides in 2018. And Mr. Speaker, as of last year, we have had some 70 persons die on the streets of our country. Mr. Speaker, we can juxtapose that number against those who died in 2016, 44, 2015, 55, 2014, 37, and 2013, 51. There has been, Mr. Speaker, a marked increase in the amount of deaths year over year of some 35% in 2018. For this year alone, Mr. Speaker, 2019, we have had some 18 persons over the first 3 months who have died on the streets of New Providence. Mr. Speaker, road traffic death is now the 13th cause of death in the Bahamas and a higher percentage in 3 to 26-year-olds in our country. So, Mr. Speaker, we are faced with a reality that exists as a result of us moving forward, result of modernity, modernizing our roads. Some has attributed to that. Mr. Speaker, this move to modernity was absolutely necessary, since we are no longer a simple fishing village. In a fishing village, Mr. Speaker, single-lane traffic may be acceptable, but not in a thriving metropolis. Mr. Speaker, in a fishing village, if you're moving in single-lane traffic behind the other vehicles with a maximum speed of 45 miles an hour, then all of the cars on that road is subject to the car in front of them that is traveling at the lowest speed. And Mr. Speaker, that is what existed for the most part in this country up until 2012. But what took place in 2012? Mr. Speaker, during the period of 2007 and 2012, the New Providence underwent a major road improvement project where we created a number of dual carriage highways: Prince Charles Drive, Tonic William Starling Highway, Bethel Avenue Highway, Milo Butler Highway. We also created a number of one-way dual carriage highways such as Market Street and Blue Hill Road. Mr. Speaker, this move to modernity was absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary because of the traffic congestion the residents of New Providence were experiencing. Mr. Speaker, as a result of that, we can now go from Sanders Beach to Carmichael Road on the George Carriage Highway within a few short minutes. Mr. Speaker, we can now travel from the Sports Center all the way to the Lyndon Pindling Airport on the dual carriage highway within minutes. Within minutes refers to the fact that folks are now traveling at higher speeds on average, far above the 45-mile-an-hour limit that has been designated for the country. And Mr. Speaker, we must address this phenomenon. Mr. Speaker, it is paramount that we introduce and implement legislation that is moving in pace and in step with that reality that we have created as a result of our improved road infrastructure. And Mr. Speaker, let us examine closely that current 45-mile-an-hour speed limit and what is possible even at that speed. Mr. Speaker, for example, if a car is traveling at 45 miles an hour, we don't necessarily perhaps think of it as being very fast. But if we want to put it into another metrics of speed, say feet per second, which a lot of persons are a little bit more familiar with, we'll discover, Mr. Speaker, that when you're traveling at 45 miles an hour, every 1 second, you would have traveled some 66 feet, Mr. Speaker. 45 miles an hour, 1 second, 66 feet. Mr. Speaker, that is almost the length of 2 omnibuses, the buses that we use in our transportation system. And Mr. Speaker, to give you an idea, that if you traveled at 60 miles an hour, Mr. Speaker, you'll be moving at some 88 feet per second. And at the alarming speed of 100 miles an hour, you would have covered 150 feet. That is more the distance, Mr. Speaker, than this hall that we are in and the House of Assembly. 1 second, 150 feet. So, Mr. Speaker, in the face of this reality, we have brought this legislation to address the increase in vehicular deaths that we see taking place on our streets, and as a result of the amount of increased speed that is taking place. And as Minister, Mr. Speaker, responsible for transport, I am pleased to speak to these amendments to the Road Traffic Act. Mainly, Mr. Speaker, these includes requiring the immediate production of a certificate of insurance and driver's license upon the request of a police officer, and requiring the payment of outstanding fines in respect of traffic offenses before the renewal of a driver's license, and prohibiting the use of electronic communication devices while driving. Mr. Speaker, the current law allows for any law enforcement officer to ask for a driver's license, and the driver of the car has 48 hours to produce that document. The amendment to Section 21 of the Principal Act, which now requires driver's license drivers to produce the driver's license and certificate of insurance for the vehicles immediately. Mr. Speaker, we have had far too many instances where persons have agreed to produce said documents and the police never see or hear from that individual again. We've had instances where drivers have given the police false identities and then fled. And Mr. Speaker, you know, while we hear the cries of those who are concerned about fundamental rights and freedoms, no one, Mr. Speaker, has the right to drive and not be accountable when asked who they are by a law enforcement officer. Mr. Speaker, the age-old issue of insurance and the lack thereof is also being addressed. The instances of motorists, Mr. Speaker, purchasing insurance for 3 months around their birthdays just to ensure that they comply with the legal requirements to license their vehicle, and then during the remaining 9 months of the year, no coverage on their vehicles has become far too common. Mr. Speaker, we want to discourage this behavior, and hopefully by requiring the insurance of the individual on them having been pulled over by an officer for an offense or being party to an accident, the motoring public will comply. Mr. Speaker, likewise, the amendment of Section 34 of the Principal Act seeks to have all who reside in the Bahamas to pay all traffic-related fines imposed before the government will issue them a license to drive. Mr. Speaker, this simple action will help to alleviate the many thousands of traffic fine offenses that are pending payment, because those who are at fault for years and in some cases decades, refuse to pay or even appear in court to defend their actions. Mr. Speaker, the insertion of the new Section 46A and 46B into the Principal Act makes provisions to criminalize, Mr. Speaker, the use of an electronic communication device while driving and driving with an open alcohol beverage or any open container of an alcohol beverage. This particular insertion is essential as it is believed that these actions are also related to the increase in traffic fatalities, which stood at some 70 once again, Mr. Speaker, during the 2018 season, resulting in an increase the year before. In the legislation included herein to address what is called distracted driving are as follows. Drivers shall not operate a vehicle while holding an electronic device unless the device is affixed to the vehicle. An instructor teaching a learner or driver shall himself or herself not be using an electronic device while the instruction is being given. The above does not apply to any emergency vehicles, Mr. Speaker, that is police and ambulances, etc. Or when the citizenry is lawfully parked. And those, Mr. Speaker, who contravene this law, offenders will be liable to a fine not exceeding $1,000. Mr. Speaker, elsewhere in the world, strict regulations limiting drivers' intake of alcohol and the use of electronic devices while driving have been enforced to preserve public safety, accompanied with major awareness campaigns. We must also ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, here in the Bahamas, why we have continued to accept a state of affairs where this ongoing devastation continue on our streets as a result of such. Mr. Speaker, those who chose to behave responsibly should not be continued to be put at risk by those who do not. And we in this government, Mr. Speaker, will not allow this to continue. Mr. Speaker, distracted driving has caused many unnecessary and timely deaths. Texting and driving increases the risk of an accident by 32%. Furthermore, one of the most dangerous driving behaviors that is spreading the epidemic of distracted driving, which has increased with the proliferation of cell phones and increased mobilization of people across the globe. And Mr. Speaker, there are more than 600 million passenger cars and 4.6 billion cell phone subscriptions worldwide, with 2 billion of those subscriptions sold in 2009 alone. Cell phone use is behind only drivers being lost in thought in causing the most distracted driving accidents globally. About 25% of our teenagers admit to answering texts at least once or more times while they are driving. Studies have proven that teens who text and drive veer out of their lanes on an average some 15% of the total drive time. That's 15% of the time, Mr. Speaker, they are in somebody else's lane. Distracted drivers, Mr. Speaker, are 4 times as likely to be involved in crashes as those who are focused on driving. Drivers who are texting can be more than 20 times more likely to crash than non-distracted drivers. Drivers who send and receive text messages, taking their eyes off the road, and they take their eyes off the road to send one text message about 5 seconds. Mr. Speaker, that's 5 seconds out of 6. And Mr. Speaker, at the speed that I would have mentioned before, 66 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, Mr. Speaker, in that 5 seconds, I want the Bahamian people to understand that in that 5 seconds to send a text, they would have covered the entire length of a football field, including the end zone. Mr. Speaker, to date, at least 32 countries have enacted laws banning cell phone use while driving. and Portugal has made using any kind of phone, including hands-free devices, illegal while driving. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas will now become the 33rd country to enact such laws. Mr. Speaker, we sought to address the matter in this bill, but we want the Bahamian people to know and to understand that they will be able to use their cell phones if it is Bluetooth to their cars or to their little air set that they would wear. But you know, Mr. Speaker, it was a concession, but we want all and sundry to understand that the law requires that while you are driving, that you are supposed to have both hands on the wheel.
Right? You can't order to 3.
So if you want to text, really, the member for South Beach said go in the passenger seat or have the passenger send it. But you know, Mr. Speaker, if you want to text, you should probably pull over to the side of the road, you know, because for those 2 or 3 seconds can make a great difference in saving lives. At the end of the day, you may end up saving your life or the life of someone else. Mr. Speaker, the insertion of the new Regulation 20A immediately following Regulations 20, and this is the regulation that I would have signed here in this place today, speaks to something that has been called for and been asked for in country for quite some time. And we in this administration is now delivering it for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, the proposed regulation that has been signed will allow left turn on red lights.
Yeah.
You gotta stop. You gotta stop. You gotta stop.
The member for St. Anne's is reminding us, you first got to stop.
You can't.
As a matter of fact, notwithstanding the regulations, you know, the signals up, it says, notwithstanding Regulation 24A, and where signs are placed permitting turns on red signal, a driver facing a red signal after coming to a full stop may cautiously enter the intersection and make such left turn.
But they can knock the sign down.
A driver turning left on red signals must give way to any pedestrian and any vehicle approaching the lane or traffic having the right-of-way under a green signal when entering the road. Mr. Speaker, this new regulation pertaining to left turn on red, even though it is a new concept here introduced in the Bahamas, it is not new globally.
No.
It is commonly known as right turn on red, or simply right turn in countries that drive on the right-hand side of the road, and a left turn on red in countries which drive on the left-hand side of the road. Right turns on red are permitted in many regions of North America. In fact, in the United States, western states, it has been allowed for more than 50 years. And eastern states in the US amended their traffic laws to allow it in the 1970s as a fuel-saving measure in response to all of the motor fuel shortages that took place in the country during the 1973 fuel crisis. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, unless you have allowed for right turn on red in the United States, you are not able to receive federal assistance in developing conservation and mandated programs. So you won't get federal funding unless you have that law within your particular state. Mr. Speaker, while there may be some opposing views to the left turn on red, you know, the supporters of such, Mr. Speaker, want to remind those individuals, I think we'd have few opponents, not many, that this measure serves in lowering vehicle emissions, it's energy saving, it helps lowers the cost of living, and it inures good to the Bahamian people.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, as I close, I wish to address just a few challenges that have come to my attention from members, both the side opposite and some of my own colleagues in regard to some of the issues in road traffic, some of the challenges we face. I wish to advise, Mr. Speaker, that under an agreement with a company in New Zealand, Data Talk, Mr. Speaker, we have ordered 5 new printers, which are earmarked for road traffic offices, namely in the Carmichael Road area, Exuma, Long Island, Eleuthera, and Abaco. However, we are awaiting receipt of these printers, and I'm pushing for them, which will serve to increase the overall efficiency and allow for the production of modern driver's license as produced here in Capital on the new traffic management system. Additionally, some persons on the Family Island may experience delays when seeking to update their current papers driver's license, Mr. Speaker, and that is because we are phasing out all paper driver's license as there are limited checks and balances in place for such. For example, there's no photo affixed, and information has not been captured in our database. So it makes it difficult to transfer them onto the current traffic management system. So we're discontinuing the paper driver's license. Mr. Speaker, we've also discovered, and this charge was being led by the former minister as well, we've also discovered cases where persons who would have failed their driving tests here in New Providence have resorted to going to the Family Islands and requesting a paper driver's license.
No. They don't do that next to them.
Mr. Speaker, we are investigating these matters closely, and the Road Traffic Department is dealing with such aggressively. Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to note that we have 2 road traffic buildings in Long Island, one in Hamilton and one in Deals, Long Island. Both of these buildings, Mr. Speaker, have been renovated and upgraded. And right now, Mr. Speaker, we are only waiting on the connection of electricity and data.
They got water?
I'm also pleased to tell the member for Long Island that we have all of the requisite equipment. But like I say, we're just waiting on BPL and DEC. And I will be pushing to have that done in the few short weeks that we have so that we can get it done.
You know they got water.
Most certainly. Mr. Speaker, our mandate in this place is very clear, eh? This House, which consists of members of Parliament who are elected by the people as well as the Speaker, is charged by the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, to legislate in this House. I think it's Article 51 of the Constitution that says Parliament is established to pass laws for the peace, order, and good governance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, that is what we do in this place. Mr. Speaker, our mandate in many ways is drawn out of our Judeo-Christian understanding. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it's the foundation of our laws. You know, in closing, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that the Bible always talks about the fact that it's a dialectic book, meaning there's really 2 choices in any sort of moral situation that exists in life, and 2 choices in legal understandings. In fact, the good Lord, the Lord of life, put it this way to Moses, who was given charge to lead the people and the children of Israel. He said, I put before you today life and death, blessings and cursings. But the Lord never gives us a choice without telling us what to choose. He said, choose life, that you and your children may live. Mr. Speaker, I believe in this moment, in this Parliament, with this very critical and timely piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, we have chosen life so that we and our children may live. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I so move.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too join in solidarity with my parliamentary colleagues in offering my condolences to the family, teachers, staff, and students at the T.A. Thompson School on the passing of a son, a student, a classmate, and a friend. I pray that this tragic incident serve as a reminder to all of us that violence affects us all. Therefore, any effective remedy requires the input or the contribution of each and every single one of us. May his soul rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, it is again my privilege to rise in this honorable House as I make my contribution to the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. I stand here today, I am reminded of the sonnet by William Wordsworth, surprised by joy, impatient as the wind I turn to share the transport. Mr. Speaker, the joys of serving always outweighs the patience necessary to bring about substantial changes necessary for the advancement of our great Bahama land. Nevertheless, I am humbled and grateful for the Almighty Father's continued blessings in the form of my supportive wife, children, and the great people of Mount Moriah constituency, all of whom continue to repose their trust in me. I would like to extend warm wishes to the F&M Council, its chairman, Mr. Bennett Minnis, and the Yellow Elder and the Millennium and Stapleton Gardens Associations for their unselfish commitment to service for the betterment of their community and the constituency as a whole. It is still an honor to lead the Ministry of National Security and its hard-working staff. And I am grateful to the member for Kalani, the Most Honorable Hubert Minnis, for extending this courtesy to me. I'm also honored to represent the agencies under my remit, inclusive of the Parliamentary Registration Department and the brave men and women of our law enforcement branches, including the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the Bahamas Department of Correctional Services. Mr. Speaker, a veritable transport of delight engulfs me today as we consider the details of the amendments to the road traffic bill. If only for a moment, I ask each of you to truly consider how the various modes of transport are crucial to the socio-economic development of our nation. From that one moment, it is only then possible to conclude that today's amendments are long overdue. Given that we are an archipelagic nation, strategically located in the Atlantic Ocean near both the North American and the South American continents. Tourism being our #1 industry, followed by the financial services sector. And the movement of people, freights, imports, and exports, all of which are significant to our economy and closely tied to transport. Transport is also very relevant to the conveniences for members of the public and visitors as they engaged in their daily activities. What has become clear in recent decades are the extent to which the new dimensions relevant to the debate on transport have emerged. The emotional, social, economic, and judicial, environmental dimensions and the impact of the same on the quality of life of our citizens and visitors as a whole are all being inevitably produced from the current transport circumstances. Mr. Speaker, the health and development of any nation lies in its ability to protect and secure the future of its citizens. For the hundreds of citizens, thousands, particularly those persons driving in the southeastern section of New Providence, inclusive of Gladstone Road and Samilo Butler Highway, along with the northeastern section of the island, inclusive of the Eastern Road and Prince Charles Drive, and to some extent in every constituency on the island. The sheer growth in the volume of traffic as a consequence of increasing prosperity of the country has brought residual problems, frustration, congestions, and irritation. I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that in the years to come, the environmental dimensions and the implications for the quality of life of people arising out of the huge and increasing volume of transport that the country is continuing to experience will capture our attention to an even greater extent than now. Mr. Speaker, on the topic of road safety, road traffic offenses and accidents are more than just a mere news event. They inflict immense pain on the victims' families and results in substantial drain on the country's health, human and financial resources. According to Browy, during the 20th century, road traffic injuries became a major public health burden. Families, particularly children, suffered from the loss of a parent, accompanied with deep and social and economic repercussions. Further, they resulted in increased costs to the already overburdened health care system, consumes resources, and results in significant losses of productivity and prosperity. Mr. Speaker, we are here today in this historic place where so much of our history has been made. Today's debate will join the annals of other pivotal proposed legislation designed to advance our society. I am here to present reasoning on the importance of why the government has sought to make amendments to the Road Traffic Act. The proposed amendments will focus on 3 pivotal areas inclusive of Section 21 of the Principal Road Traffic Act, which seeks to require all persons to make his or her name and address, the name and address of the owner of the motor vehicle, or produce a certificate of insurance to an officer upon request. Further, Mr. Speaker, failure of the driver to produce the same will result in a criminal offense. Meanwhile, clauses 3 and 4 will seek to amend sections 34 and 36 of the Principal Act, thereby requiring all persons to make outstanding payments for fines in respect to an offense under the Act before granted a driver's license or a public service driver's license. In addition, Mr. Speaker, a new section titled 46A and 46B will be inserted into Clause 5 of the Principal Act. The former amendment seeks to address and criminalize the use of electronic communications during or while driving. Simultaneously, The latter will be added, and it also seeks to criminalize persons driving with an open alcoholic beverage or an open container or of an alcoholic beverage while driving, attempting to drive, or in charge of a motor vehicle. Clause 6 seeks to amend Section 59 of the Principal Act as it seeks to make the failure of a driver to produce a driver's license upon request to a uniformed police officer an offense. Finally, Mr. Speaker, Clause 7 seeks to amend Section 60 of the same Act, thereby making provision for a uniformed officer to arrest a driver on suspicion of committing an offense against the Act in which a driver fails to produce a driver's license or a valid certificate or insurance for examination. And I caution here, Mr. Speaker, that these arrests are not based on any arbitrary means, but the police officer has, or the peace officer has, the ability to exercise his or her discretion, and will do so as in the case of other offenses similarly related. Mr. Speaker, the World Health Organization estimates that traffic-related incidences cost countries on average 3% of their GDP. Of course, the proposed amendments of the road traffic bill are much more than economic loss, as the lives of humans are so much more valuable. The proposed bill, Mr. Speaker, hopes to frame road traffic safety as a health and development framework for the socio-economic and human capital development of the country. Concurrently, we hope to shift the public's behavior and attitudes, which will ultimately save lives. Mr. Speaker, road traffic safety is very important, and it should be followed at all times to ensure safety practices are being adhered to by operators of vehicles, motorbikes, bicycles, and other road transport, passengers and pedestrians. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, traffic fatality accidents continue to be a major challenge on the public's thoroughfares in the Bahamas, particularly on the island of New Providence and Grand Bahama. Last year, there were 63 traffic fatality accidents, which represented a 29% increase over 2017. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, resulting from the 63 traffic fatality accidents were the untimely demise of 69 traffic victims, which reflected a 28% increase from the previous year. Of the traffic fatality victims by island, 42 of the fatalities occurred on the island of New Providence, 11 on the island of Grand Bahama, and 10 on the remaining family islands. Mr. Speaker, regrettably, since the new year commenced, there have been some 1,831 accidents that resulted in damage. Approximately 1,554, or 84.9%, have occurred on the island of New Providence. 195, or 10.6%, occurred on Grand Bahama. 50, or 2.7%, occurred on Abu Cove. Of even grave concern, Mr. Speaker, were the 14 traffic fatalities which occurred, of which 11, or 78.6%, occurred on New Providence, and 2, or 14.3%, on the island of Andros. Mr. Speaker, understanding that the loss of any life is one too many, my ministry and the agencies under my remit will continue to concentrate on road safety. Mr. Speaker, to address the concerns of road traffic safety, our government has applied a three-pronged approach inclusive of investment in the Royal Bahamas Police Force, particularly the road traffic section, improved legislation, 2, an increased public safety and awareness campaign. With reference, Mr. Speaker, to our government's investment in technology, approximately 25 new motorcycles were deployed to assist in the management of road safety throughout the Bahamas. Of the new motorcycles, 13 were deployed in New Providence, 5 on the island of Grand Bahama, 2 in Abaco and Exuma, respectively, and 1 in Long Island, Eleuthera, and Cat Island, respectively. Mr. Speaker, to complement the motorbikes, new speed detection technology was recently acquired, and it will seek to address the growing amount of speeding violations on both New Providence and Grand Bahama in particular. The same technology will also be expanded to the Family Islands in the near future. Mr. Speaker, priority will be given to areas such as the southwestern New Providence, where 15 traffic fatalities occurred, which accounted for some 24% of such related deaths. Of particular concern is the Tonic-Darling Highway in the vicinity of the tennis courts and opposite Blue Hill Heights. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, both the northeastern and the central New Providence divisions accounted for some 6 traffic fatalities, which reflected 10% respectively. Of course, Mr. Speaker, of particular concern is Beatrice Avenue, just off Prince Charles Drive. Mr. Speaker, priority will also be given to the times of such incidents, as most traffic fatalities in the Bahamas occur between the hours of 5 p.m. and 9 p.m., which accounts for some 30% of all fatalities. This was followed by the hours of 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. That period, this accounted for some 27% of all traffic fatalities. Mr. Speaker, law enforcement continues to embrace technology and information communication technology in particular in order to reduce crime and the fear of crime. In accordance, 507 new CCTV cameras will be installed throughout New Providence. My ministry has allotted and is expected to spend, after approval by Cabinet, which has already been approved, some $3.3 million during this fiscal period to increase the number of CCTV cameras throughout New Providence, thereby bringing the total to some 750 cameras. This new technology will mostly intended to target prolific offenders, will allow the police as well as the road traffic department to monitor busy streets on a 24/7 basis. It is our intent to ensure that there is a zero-tolerance approach to committing serious road traffic offenses. Mr. Speaker, the second-pronged approach is legislation, which will seek to reframe road traffic safety as a national development priority. Mr. Speaker, according to the World Health Organization, combined with other variable comprehensive national road safety legislation and regulations are effective in reducing injuries and fatalities. The proposed amendment, Mr. Speaker, being presented as a result of data and in-depth information collected and analyzed. Mr. Speaker, globally, there are 1.2 million road traffic deaths each year, and such related fatalities are the leading cause of death among persons between the ages of 15 and 29. Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas, as it relates to traffic accidents, persons between the ages of 18 and 35 years were the most prevalent group affected. Approximately 24.6% of all traffic fatalities were associated with the aforementioned demographic group. Mr. Speaker, even more disturbing, approximately 77% of all traffic fatalities last year were young men, while women represented 23%. Globally, Mr. Speaker, it is estimated that men are 3 times more likely to die from road traffic accidents compared to women. Mr. Speaker, our country is evolving, and we have to meet or exceed global standards. No longer, Mr. Speaker, can police officers take the words of drivers that they are who they say they are, or that the owner of a vehicle is who they say that person may be. This road traffic amendment bill seeks to amend Section 21 of the Act, and it will require all persons, at the request of a police officer, to provide his or her legal name and address, the name and address of the owner of the motor vehicle, and the mode of transport, certificate of insurance, immediately, along with a valid driver's license. Failure to produce the aforementioned documents will result in a criminal offense. Mr. Speaker, however, the proposed amendment goes beyond the obvious of assisting the police officer in verifying the driver's legally obtained a driver's license, and that they have the right to operate the mode of transport on a public roadway where applicable, with applicable insurance. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas has endured an unregulated practice of drivers, whether it was the owner's mode of transport or not, using public roads without proper insurance. This amendment, Mr. Speaker, will allow now required persons to have the appropriate insurance so as to address drivers' liabilities and compensation of road crash victims, such as payments for property damage or associated medical costs. In furtherance to the same, Mr. Speaker, while it is not our intent to wish harm on any driver, ensuring that driver's licenses are mandatory allows emergency officials to identify individuals involved in accidents if they are hurt badly and or cannot communicate with first responders. Mr. Speaker, the driver's license will also aid in officials being able to contact family members to inform them of their incident. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, medical personnel at the hospital can begin the admissions process, which is critical during life-threatening injuries. Mr. Speaker, this is key to helping keep our roads safe while allowing victims to be properly processed and allowing victims due process. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that if the said driver fails to produce the appropriate certificate or insurance and the driver's license, they shall be guilty of an offense and may be arrested on suspicion of committing an offense and or possibly liable to face a fine of $200 or imprisonment for a term of 3 months or both, without the right to a jury trial and or indictment. Mr. Speaker, the summary conviction allows for both swift justice while serving not to create a backlog in the judicial system. Mr. Speaker, the second component of the amendment bill will seek to address concerns regarding Section 34 and 36 of the Principal Act. Clause 3 of the proposed changes will address the former. Section 34 and the clause of the proposed changes will address the latter, Section 36. The former will now require payments for outstanding fines in respect to previous traffic offenses under this Act before a license is granted. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, the latter will now explicitly state that only after all outstanding fines have been paid that a driver's license may be granted. Mr. Speaker, the third component of the amendment seeks, via Clause 5 of the bill, to insert Sections 46A and 46B. The former will serve to prohibit the use of electronic communications devices while driving. The use of electronic devices while driving has become an epidemic in our society, especially among our young people. While no substantial data exists, Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas, anecdotally, data suggests that the use of such devices have resulted in many traffic deaths or accidents. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety in the United States, electronic devices impair driving visually, manually, and cognitively. Specifically, the distractions means that drivers are not thinking about the driving task, being alert and watching the road and or surrounding environment, and keeping their hands focused on the steering wheel. The revised changes specifically states that the use of any device that is held in one hand or both hands, or with any other part of the body or otherwise, unless the device is attached in full or in part to the vehicle and remains fixed while driving, will now be an offense. The fine for the aforestated offense shall not exceed $1,000. Mr. Speaker, the latter, Section 46B, seeks to prohibit driving with an open alcoholic beverage, or any open container of alcoholic beverage. This, Mr. Speaker, small but powerful amendment can save many lives in the Bahamas. Too often, both men and women can be seen drinking while driving. The problem is most prevalent during weekends and holidays. Studies have proven that consuming alcohol and driving, particularly with a blood alcohol concentration level of 0.05 grams per deciliter, has the potential to greatly increase the risk of any accidents and possibly result in death and or serious injury, Mr. Speaker. Of even more significance, this amendment hopes to stop or discourage young people from drinking and driving because this group are at the greatest risk for alcohol-related accidents. Impairment by alcohol is a very important factor influencing both the risk of a road accident as well as the severity of the injuries that result from such incidents. Mr. Speaker, it is well known that drivers who have been drinking have much higher risk of involvement in accidents as opposed to those with no alcohol in their blood. Simultaneously, the risk increases rapidly with increasing blood alcohol content, and when coupled with inexperienced young drivers, the risk of a crash compared with experienced drivers increases 2.5 times more. According, Mr. Speaker, to the World Health Organization, death among young people are reduced by as much as 24% when legislation are established to reduce drinking and driving. If these simple amendments can save but only one life, then, Mr. Speaker, it is worth it. Mr. Speaker, an amendment has also been made to Section 59 of the Principal Act.
Honorable Member, are you on a point of order, Pine Ridge?
Point of information on that area, which is relevant for the public. I think nothing controversial, Mr. Speaker. Something I think
Honorable Member.
Clarity, because
Honorable Member, what you can do is you can make a note. Are you speaking on this matter?
I just want to clarify. I thought that the point is well taken, but it's sorry.
But you cannot interrupt a speaker unless you have point of order, point of privilege.
That could have helped us nationally on the point that you were dealing with.
The chair recognizes the member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an amendment has also been made to Section 59 of the Principal Act via Clause 6 of the bill, which will seek to make the failure of a driver to produce a driver's license upon request to a uniform officer an offense. Again, producing such a document will allow the officer in verifying that the driver legally obtained the driver's license. Failure to produce such a license will result in the individual guilty of an offense, and or he or she will be liable to a summary conviction to a fine of $40. Mr. Speaker, finally, Section 60 of the same Act will be amended via Clause 7 of the bill, and it seeks to make provisions for a uniform officer to arrest a driver without a warrant. This arrest may result from the officer having suspicion that the driver committed an offense against the act, inclusive of refusing to provide one's name, home address, and a work address, or providing the same that is false, failing to produce a valid driver's license or public services driver's license, C, failing to produce a valid certificate of insurance, and D, the officer suspecting that the failure or refusal is with intent to deceive or enable the avoidance of any penalty. Mr. Speaker, the third pronged approach to the road traffic is public awareness campaign within our respective communities. The approach will have far-reaching implications, as last year there were 31 fatalities involving pedestrians. That accounted for 45% of all victims in 2018. Meanwhile, there were 20 drivers-involved fatalities, which accounted for 29% on the 69 deaths. Passengers accounted for 12 involved incidents, and it reflected 17%. Both motorcyclists and bicyclists accounted for 3 deaths each, and it reflected some 4% of the fatalities. So, Mr. Speaker, last year there were some 28,000 fixed penalty notices issued by law enforcement. Of that number, 17,791 occurred on New Providence and 6,098 on Grand Bahama. Concurrently, there were 111 serious related traffic injuries, of which 27 occurred in New Providence. For the first 2 months, 2019, there had already been some 4,976 fixed penalties. It is hoped, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, are you requiring an extension? 2 minutes?
About a minute.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once this proposed amendment has been passed and implemented, we can begin to maintain an efficient and comprehensive system for managing information on road traffic injuries and fatalities, as statistics will significantly influence policy and legislation. More importantly, we hope as a government to introduce new social norms as it relates to road safety. It is hoped that these amendments will change the social meaning attributed to certain behaviors and can change individual behaviors as a whole. Mr. Speaker, in closing, road safety is everybody's business. And as the government of today, we have an obligation to govern and put forth appropriate legislation to protect the well-being of all within our borders. Hence, Mr. Speaker, I commit that the agencies under my remit and myself to this worthy cause. I second the bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member Asmani.
Speaker,
The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I won't be long at all. I just wanted clarification because I think most, and I didn't seek to interrupt the seconder on his bill. I just thought it was a valid point. The point, either minister can answer. If there's an alcoholic beverage and I'm in the vehicle and I'm driving, the passenger in the vehicle can also claim to own this. So I just want to know, is there going to be more breathalyzers taking place in terms of being able to prove that the driver himself was drinking, or is the owner of this open container of alcohol? I'm just asking because people would be concerned on that matter.
Well, Thank you
The chair recognizes the honorable member from
Thank you so
Mount
much.
Moriah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. During when I first started my contribution, I indicated that, and this is one of the powers of police officers the world over, in situations such as this, where there is the ability to exercise one's discretion, the ability to investigate. None of these things changes. It's no different than if the police were to stop a vehicle and find drugs in it. At the end of the day, it's through the investigative process, some determination will be made whose drugs it is. And so it doesn't change in any respect, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angliston.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, thank you. I rise on behalf of the good people of Angliston, the proud and resilient people of Angliston, who I am so proud to represent, Mr. Speaker. And just before I begin my presentation, I was begrudgeful of the opportunity that I did not have when the member for Southern Shore spoke about R.M. Bailey. As you know, there are a number of members in this House who have come from that wonderful institution. And just to reiterate, to take some ownership of the issue, R.M. Bailey recently had their honors award ceremony, and they had the historic number of 409 children who had hit the honor roll at that school. And of particular note is sorry? Face the Nation. That's Golden Isles. That's another graduate, Mr. Speaker. and Bamboo Town. Speaker, of note, though, was that there was a young boy there who was the keynote speaker, 17-year-old. His name is Keno Ambrista, and I think he's from the Ida Street community, which is the Angliston community, but it's the constituency of Marathon who gave the keynote speech in that. And his story is amazing. He is the seventh of 9 children. His mother died when he was 10. And when he entered R.M. Bailey in the 10th grade, his GPA was 1.5. And by the time he had begun grade 12, which is this first term, I think it was, he had the highest GPA in that grade. And it was an amazing story. Speaker, one other point, the Minister of Education is here, and it's a legacy issue that he has inherited, but I hope that he will bring, he's a Kemp Road boy, and I'm hoping that he will bring the passion required to this. While we were there, the children, it happened to be a very peculiar weather circumstances, and it was almost tornado-like with squalls and winds and rain. I don't know if you remember that last week. And the children were under a tent because the auditorium burned several years ago. And the rain wet so many parents and young people. And I felt very sad because it was such a sparkling event with such upright, beautiful, high-performing young people. And they were out there and exposed to the elements. And so I think that, and I've spoken with the principal about this. I commit as Member of Parliament to do what I can. If you can do a GoFundMe, or the alumni can do a fundraiser, let's get an auditorium for R.M. Bailey, please. Speaker, I rise to contribute to these bills which seek to amend certain provisions in the Road Traffic Act. Speaker, we support the provisions relative to the prohibition of the use of handheld communications and open containers of alcoholic beverages, save as it relates to the level of fines, which we believe to be too high and prohibitive. Is it still 1,000? I think you've reduced it. They've reviewed it and reduced it, Speaker. Previously it was at a level of 1,000, and so I will not go to that issue. 500 is still high compared to other jurisdictions. And so I'll speak a little bit about the fines in other jurisdictions, and because we've learned you don't have to kill people to curb behaviors. And Mr. Speaker, we do not support the provisions giving new powers of arrest to the police, which we believe to be ill-conceived, and urge the government to make the appropriate amendment to this provision in the bill. Speaker, I'm going to give a little bit of background on this act. the Road Traffic Act. Many may not know that the original Road Traffic Act was enacted in 1958 in the aftermath of the general strike. It was the direct result of the general strike. As we know, the general strike was precipitated by the many social ills at that time at the hands of the oppressive and racist regime in control at that time, the United Bahamian Party. The most proximate issue which ignited the general strike was a dispute between taxi drivers and the minority-controlled tour companies and the meter cab company as to who was owned by the minority elite, as to who would transport guests from the then new Nassau International Airport to the hotels into town. Taxi drivers led by the late Clifford Darling, a former Speaker of this House, blocked the entrance to the airport in protest to the tour company's attempt to usurp what they saw as being a windfall on economic opportunity or piece of the pie for ordinary black Bahamians. This protest action created a powerful momentum across the country. There was work stoppage everywhere, in the hotels, on the docks, and in various workplaces across the country. The general strike of 1958 lasted for 19 days. In the wake of this social, political, and economic turmoil, the general strike, the then colonial secretary came to the Bahamas and held a series of meetings with various groupings in an effort to garner an understanding of the issues leading to the strike. A number of reforms resulted from this inquiry, including the enactment of the Road Traffic Act, which brought about the creation of a road traffic authority and rules governing various franchises, among other things. Since 1958, there have been scores of amendments creating a patchwork, which we now see as the current Road Traffic Act. When I served as Minister of Transport, the need was self-evident, as I'm sure it has to be for this minister, for a comprehensive overhaul of the legal framework for road traffic, and most especially issues impacting road safety in our country. Road safety is a multi-layered concept requiring a broad array of responses. This includes assuring the highest standards for the qualification and training of new drivers. It includes a compendium of enlightened rules governing conduct of all road users on our streets. It includes the implementation of appropriate penalties for violations and effective enforcement as an accountability for violations. With that understanding, when I served, we embarked on a comprehensive review of the Road Traffic Act. We engaged the technical support of the Commonwealth Secretariat, which works closely with stakeholders in this country, resulting in the proposal of new and necessary provisions to achieve these objectives. There ensued extensive consultation with public and private stakeholders. The support of the then Attorney General, Alison Maynard Gibson, to this exercise was invaluable. She designated a draftsman who was essentially dedicated to this task over a period of more than a year. The end product was a new road traffic bill, representing a modernized legal framework governing road traffic in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas from 1958 to now. The first real comprehensive revision since 1958. It was for us a great sense of achievement to be a part of this history, understanding its meaning to enhancing safety on our roads, saving lives, and introducing transformative law. Achieving this legislative landmark required and received all hands on deck, not the PLP minister, the permanent secretary, the undersecretary, the controller of the road traffic department, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Department of Social Services, the insurance industry, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Works, the Office of the Attorney General, ground transport stakeholders, and many others. So you can well imagine, Mr. Speaker, that it is a major and continuing disappointment that this administration has yet to advance either what they met in place or anything at all, with their own nuances over the last 2 years, and have effectively slowed or brought to a halt what was an historic momentum for important social and economic legislation. So I heard the talk in here, you know, but then there's a reality that is subsumed by the talk in this House. My sentiments are not simply politics, but genuine disappointment. But of course, we wonder why this approach has been taken when you consider what has been conceded by the ministers in this House of what is described as a bloody carnage on our streets. What we do see here today, by and large, is that provisions have been pulled out here and there from the draft bill, which they have been sitting on for the last 2 years. The question that has to be asked is this administration playing games with the lives of the Bahamian people? And I don't say that lightly, because you have a framework that addresses all that you say in this parliament, and you've not brought it. You've pulled out pieces, little pieces here and there. But you come here on your proverbial white horse, claiming to be introducing this legislation as a commitment to road safety. And I'm not querying your commitment. I'm querying why you haven't brought the legislation which would embody and evidence a commitment, Speaker. Even if this government did not accept aspects of the policies driving the bill, certainly the bill must have provided a solid foundation for reform. After all this time, should we not have seen your own version being brought forward, not what we left there, your own version, bearing in mind the non-partisan stakeholders who participated in that exercise? This is important because just as the cell phone provisions, for example, which we see here today, are being touted as inuring to road safety, and they do, so too do many of the other provisions in the draft bill. The approach to road safety and saving lives and averting injuries and providing for a more rational environment on our streets must of necessity be multifaceted. But pulling out fragments from the bill in this piecemeal fashion undermines the serious objectives of a full road safety regime. And the Minister of Transport shared the statistics here today of what the impact of road safety accidents. And so I don't want to go through it. The World Health Organization, they talked about it being one of the major causes of death, one of the leading causes of young men, death of young men, etc. A major public health issue in this country and globally. As an example, the minister, I am sure, is aware of the urgency of creating an offense of manslaughter or killing the cause of dangerous driving and providing for more rational sentences. The draft bill that we left, and I'm not saying you should have brought that, you should bring something though, because you had, a lot of work was done. The draft bill addressed this vexing issue, and specifically provided for prison sentences of up to 10 years and disqualification of driver's licenses to replace the current minimal penalties in place for causing death. The gross deficiencies in the law are seen over and over in this country, and most recently, a sentence pronounced of a fine of $20,000 for a driver who admitted guilt in the killing of 2 people. This has long been a sore point and a painful bone of contention for many families families of persons killed through negligence or recklessness on roads across the country, and goes to the heart of justice. Reform is long overdue. And I came across, oh boy, where is it? I came across it was a piece written by a woman whose father was killed in 2004, I think it was, or 2006. Oh boy, I don't have it handy. But she was calling upon the government to change the law, because I think in that case the fine was one of $6,000. And it's not the fault of the system, because this is what the law allows or provides for. And so this would have been an opportunity to address a serious deficiency in the law and bring some peace of mind to people who've lost loved ones as a result of traffic accidents. And so, Mr. Speaker, we must wonder how serious we are about road safety when we have not even addressed this issue. Other reforms in that bill of which I spoke includes the creation of a National Road Safety Council, an important policy position to provide oversight of road safety initiatives for the prevention of fatalities. This is in accordance with global standards, the creation of this council and putting it in legislation, and is so important in light of all the traffic fatalities and serious injuries, the quadriplegia, paraplegia, and that we are seeing in this country. Even as recently as last weekend, when 2 people were killed in separate accidents. Traffic accidents may result in serious injuries such as quadriplegia, paraplegia, amputations. This type of trauma cuts short the productivity of young men and women in this country. I recall visiting someone in the male orthopedic ward of Princess Margaret Hospital some years ago, I felt like I was in the twilight zone. From one bed to the next was one young male or the other, suffering varying stages of serious injury caused by traffic accidents. I remember on that day seeing a mother walking alongside her son, who was on a gurney, and I learned from Grand Bahama that he had sustained injuries in a motorcycle accident. In speaking to me, he was upbeat, telling me he'd soon be walking again. His mother pulled me aside with sad eyes, telling me that her son will never walk again. Traffic accidents and fatalities change lives. The National Road Safety Council is important. It will help us with research, with analysis, and particularly on the issue of data. The Minister of National Security just told us who's responsible for the police? We have no data. We are relying on global data. In 2019, we have no data. The National Road Safety Council is important. The draft road traffic bill also had appendage to it regulations for driving schools. Today, driving schools are without formal regulation in this country. Draft regulations were also completed for the certification of driving instructors. You can well imagine how both of these measures directly impact the quality of training of new drivers and have a direct impact on safety of our streets. Unfortunately, this government has not seen fit to progress this significant body of work in the interests of the Bahamian people. I'm sure they have their reasons, but I am concerned. The amendments before us today, dealing with the use of cell phones or handheld communication devices while driving, have in fact been carved away verbatim from the very draft bill of which I spoke. But the other important provisions are currently laying dormant, gathering dust, it seems. We will be interested to hear the justification for this policy approach. So you will not be surprised then that the fact that knowing that it comes from the draft and the work that has been undertaken, that we support this aspect of the bill. And as the minister has shared with us, it showed that the level of the impact of fatalities in our country, and it says that driver behavior is responsible for 80 to 90% of road crashes. And one of the most dangerous driver behaviors is the spreading epidemic of distracted driving, which has increased with the proliferation of cell phones and increasing mobilization of people across the road. And that's taken from the U.S. Department of Transportation, but it's according to the World Health Organization, Mr. Speaker. The world has moved in this direction across the board by either restricting use or banning use completely. And if you look at the United States, they have a variation of the approaches. Absolute restriction. I don't think they've done any complete banning in the United States, but some countries have done complete banning of the use of cell phones. Other countries have restricted the type of use. The amendment before us today takes a restrictive approach, allowing cell phone use, but only in limited circumstances, and the minister has spoken to the Bluetooth and the way of doing it, where you don't hold it in your hands, Mr. Speaker. We are concerned, however, about the level of fines. I'm now told that it's about 500, which is different from the bill that was originally laid, Speaker. But when you look at the levels of fines in other countries, which I did in the UK, a first-time offender now faces a fine of £200, which is approximately $244, and 6 points on his or her driver's license. In places like South Carolina, $25 up to as high as $750 in Utah. In Bermuda, $500. Trinidad and Tobago, $225. Qatar, $137. The Philippines, $100. And on and on, Mr. Speaker. So the fines are still on the high side, in my view, Mr. Speaker. The rate of compliance, we believe behavior changes can be achieved with more rational fines and vigilant enforcement. We differed from the prior administration on fines for the failure to wear seatbelts and made comparisons with other jurisdictions, and our fines were found to be out of whack and unduly high. On taking office, we subsequently amended the level of fines, and I think we will agree that by and large, I think the police will tell us, there is compliance, Speaker. The rate of compliance of seatbelt use shows that draconian fines are not necessary to procure compliance, but can cause undue hardship on the citizenry. So the government should, I'm inviting them to look yet again at the level of the fine for use of cell phones. But we support the amendment, but have concerns about the level of fine, even at $500, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I want to recommend, and I believe it's been said it would be done, that there has to be public education and sensitization through warnings before the full rollout. And because it's a phenomenon, the use of cell phones is almost like an addiction. It's very difficult. I found something online that people can Google. It says how to stop texting and driving. It's almost like saying, how to give up alcohol or whatever. And then it goes through some various strategies that can be deployed by drivers. But it's a tough habit to break. And so I think, in my view, the best way to approach it would be to go with warnings, education, sensitization, before you go to full-out enforcement. Because I saw that in a place like Sweden, I think it was, Sweden has no cell phone law. Sweden, which has fewer motor vehicle crash deaths than other high-income countries, including the United States, does not ban the use of cell phones while driving. Instead, it puts its energy behind efforts to raise awareness of the risks of distracted driving, according to a report by the World Health Organization. So while we support the approach of the government at this time, it is interesting to note that education and information has an invaluable role in changing behaviors in cell phone use, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the provisions relative to the prohibition of open container of alcoholic beverages, I don't think it was contained in the original draft that I spoke of, but we support it, but urge clarity on what is meant by open. If you've got a vodka bottle, it's not, the cap is not off, but broken, you have it in your car somewhere. I just want to make sure we understand the meaning of open. And I also want to note that the breathalyzer provisions, which are in the law and have been in the law a long time, have still yet to be activated, and speaks to blood alcohol, which is a more reliable indicator of a driver being impacted than an open bottle in a vehicle. But I only put that out there. It's not being activated at this time. When I was there, the commissioner was training officers for that purpose. But I don't know what the position is. We have serious concerns about the provision in this bill which extends power of arrest for police where a driver does not have possession of insurance documents and driver's license. And I think the language has been modified. I didn't realize that we had been circulating a new version of this bill, but I looked at it just now. We do not understand why this government sees fit to legislate new and further incursions into the freedom of movement of citizens. We find it curious that this has been prioritized when important provisions in the draft bill dealing with road safety have not been brought forward. The police already have extensive powers in traffic violation matters. And Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is not a police state. And this is not necessary, Mr. Speaker. I reviewed other jurisdictions, including the United Kingdom, which is what our law is, was similar to what our law is, but they put a little nuance in there which makes sense, which provides that in instances where a driver does not have insurance documents when stopped by police, a notice is issued to that driver, requiring them to produce within 24 hours. And if they fail to do so, that notice serves as a summons to answer charges in court. I was surprised to note that in the UK law enforcement agencies, they actively discourage owners from keeping such documents in their vehicles. They say, don't keep them in your car. We say, and carry it wherever you go. And they've advised, from a crime prevention point of view, it is better never to leave your driving documents in your car and produce them within the 7-day period. And they go further. They say, in fact, it is dangerous to keep all of your documentation inside your car, as this would give thieves everything they need in order to prove ownership of the vehicle in the event it was stolen. So, Mr. Speaker, this appears logical to me. So why would our government now mandate by law something which other sophisticated law enforcement agencies say is a risk and which makes sense to me as a risk? And this needs to be rethought, Mr. Speaker, and we urge the government not to proceed with this provision in this bill. And I would commend to them a innovation like the British have done, where you serve a notice, and if they do not deliver, to answer the question that the member for Mount Moriah raised, people say they come and they don't show, it serves as a summons, and if they do not appear, then the warrants of arrest will issue, Speaker. Again, we say it is unfortunate that other important provisions in the road traffic bill, such as the transportation of disabled persons, or the offense of parking in handicapped parking spots, the right to disqualify drivers and introduce demerit points as part of the penalty regime, all these things were in the bill. The disappointment in not assiduously processing the road traffic bill is further compounded by this government bringing a halt to all the groundwork laid and steps taken for the implementation of a pilot bus project to promote a safe and efficient public transport system. This is road safety too, Speaker. It was to, within 6 to 12 months, lead to the rollout of a universal busing system. The pilot project was to mirror all the features of the final system. I hear the member for Golden, wait from again? Tall Pines? Saying I had 2 times, Minister, we completed this. It was just to roll out. It was at a rollout stage.
When was it completed?
Speaker, when you hear the noise in the market, you know the price of fish is very high, Speaker, the pilot project was to mirror all the features of the final system to include scheduled stops at bus stop locations only, uniform drivers, wireless internet service, etc., and inbuilt security and safety provisions. Speaker, the signage is there. Go in the Eastern District of New Providence, and the member for Seabreeze knows because it's in our constituency. The sign's right there gathering dust. Speaker, 2 years, the Speaker. This groundwork was the product of the labor of a committee comprising representatives of franchise owners, and the member for Pinewood will tell you he was on that. He helped us with this, Mr. Speaker. The F&M member for Pinewood, franchise and varying government agencies. Their extensive dialogue and arduous work was prolonged, but it bore fruit, Mr. Speaker. A transportation specialist consultant was engaged pursuant to an IDB grant. A pilot project design was completed with timelines. A location for a bus depot was selected. A pilot route established. Signage erected. This administration has stopped or interrupted. I don't know what the status is. That momentum, which brings us to where we are 2 years later, with nothing and a busing system which continues to be plagued by various safety and security risk factors, Mr. Speaker. Part and parcel of the reform and modernization process was an agreement through the Ministry of Finance for a public-private partnership for the purchase of a dedicated road traffic department headquarters to include a driving range. Right now, if there's no driving range, you have to go wherever you go. Driver's examination quarters with simulators for testing, lifts to provide for more comprehensive inspections on the vehicles. This too was stopped. And so the department remains housed at the National Sports Stadium 2 years later at what was intended to be temporary headquarters. And they only got there because there was they should have been out of that Clarence Bain building anyhow. But the hurricane hit it and we had to find something quickly. This effort was ancillary to the core undertaking, which was the automation of the road traffic department to include new secure driver's licenses, secure title deeds, the production of license plates enhanced for CCTV in conjunction with the Bahamas Prison Service to be rolled out nationwide. And the member for Bamboo Town has told us they ran into some difficulty, but I think that I have to be a little critical, Bamboo Town. You have to put some fire behind this and complete this process. This pure fire now, not your kind of fire. Mr. Speaker, the increase in revenue and efficiency bears out the importance of this project. And we see it when we do the budget. Millions in enhanced revenue from the road traffic department, unprecedented. And it also provides interfacing. That's why, I hear what you're saying. But this system provides interfacing with the police. They can find out anything they need to do. They don't need to stop no one and arrest people. And I have a problem with this discretion concept, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned that a police officer has a discretion to decide whether he's going to arrest me, Mr. Speaker. The law cannot be undefined in that way. Discretion is a dangerous thing if I don't know what it means and how you exercise it, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, may I have two extra minutes, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
You actually have three.
Speaker, there's also interface with the Treasury, with insurance companies and the courts to deal with the issue of fines and non-payment of fines. All of these things we have in this bill. This system allows an interface that gives great leverage to law enforcement agencies. Mr. Speaker, fragmenting and disrupting a reform process, I don't understand why. And so, Speaker, I think we deserve better. We had a plan, Speaker. It was not ad hoc. It was comprehensive. It involved modernization. It took us leaps forward. But what I see now is a stalled and stultified involvement. And I don't see there the fundamental issue of road safety, that 1958 that came on the heels of general strike, where that has been taken forward. I'm very disappointed about it, to be honest with you, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, I want to raise one more point. We had undertaken a study of traffic patterns in 5 islands that had become problematic. And they include Bimini, Spanish Wells, Harbor Island, and Hopetown. And also, I think, Great Harbor Key. These is where you have high volume of traffic in these very small places, Speaker. Studies were completed. Well, it's prosperous, but people have concern about quality of life now in terms of all these big vehicles and these small roads, Mr. Speaker. Studies were completed and town meetings commenced in these places. Sorry, I don't think it was Great Harbor Key, it was Green Turtle Key. Green Turtle Key, Speaker. Recommendations were made to urgently redress the serious traffic challenges. May we ask the status of this important exercise for the people of Bimini, Harbor Island, Hopetown, Green Turtle Key, and Spanish Wells, Mr. Speaker. In short, Mr. Speaker, we support the cell phone provisions. We do not support the level of fines which we believe can cause severe hardship. We don't think it's necessary. You can curb behaviors, as we saw in Sweden, through education, warnings, enforcement, enlightenment, etc. So we support the provisions. We support the open container provisions. We do not support the clause empowering police to arrest a driver who does not have the insurance papers. Our research shows that what you are requiring is being discouraged and advised against by other law enforcement agencies, Mr. Speaker. We call on the government to bring forward the draft road traffic bill which was the historic revision since its original enactment of 1958. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Yamakro.
I just rise on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, in terms of, I've heard the Honorable Member for Angliston indicate that the bill allows the office, and it almost appears, that allows the police officer carte blanche to just arrest somebody who does not possess an insurance or driver's license. For Section 77 of the proposed amendment, which amends Section 60, and Section 60 of the Act, of the original Act, gives the police the power of arrest, where the police, it says, a police officer in uniform may arrest without warrant a driver of a motor vehicle who he has reason to suspect of having committed an offense against his act. If the driver, on being requested to do so by the police officer, refuses either to give his name and address or to produce his driver's license. So the police officer already has this power of arrest. In Section 60, the amendment of Section 60, as it relates to the driver's license or the insurance, it is designed to prevent those persons who would want to deceive the police officer. But if the police officer, you say you don't have your insurance, right? Or if you say you don't have your driver's license or your public service driver's license, it gives you a 48-hour period to produce them. And this is all designed to prevent what is a mischief, I mean, in terms of the production of the insurance
or the driver's license, we're finding that too many persons are driving vehicles without insurance. And so the police officer doesn't have an absolute right if he comes and he meets someone who does not have those documents. He's empowered, he's authorized and instructed by the law to give them a 24-hour period to produce those documents. So there's no outright power of arrest to just take you into custody.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angleston.
Speaker, just to respond to my learned friend, my brother from Yamakro. Speaker, there is a provision in our law which mandates that if a police officer asks you your name and address, and if he feels that you're being deceptive, he can undertake an arrest. So that's not a new provision. This, however, is saying there you've committed an offense, and if you've had a fender bender, that could be driving without due care and attention. That's an offense. How many of us have committed that offense? I mean, I don't know. Okay, but if you've committed an offense under this act, let's say driving without due care and attention, and the officer requests you, being in uniform, and you fail to produce a valid certificate of insurance, he may arrest you without warrant. That's unprecedented. It's unprecedented. Under the current law, if you do not have your insurance papers, you have 24 hours, 48, whatever it is, to produce it. This is saying now that if you have committed an offense like a fender bender, on the spot, when other law enforcement agencies are telling you not to carry with you keep those documents in your car. Because if your car is stolen outside your house in the middle of the night, they're gone with all your papers. Speaker.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Southern Shores.
You're going to go beyond? You're going to go beyond? You're going to have to go beyond for a few minutes?
Honourable member, we are at that time. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House goes beyond the 1 p.m. Hour for about 10 minutes or so the former Minister of Transport can speak. I so move.
Second, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour for approximately 10 minutes. As many as are in favour will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour for approximately 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much, and I express my gratitude to the good people of Southern Shores for allowing me to be here. I will speak to them at a later date. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing shoulda, coulda, woulda. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm moved and touched by the honourable member for Angleston being disappointed that we haven't done in 23 months what that honourable member had 10 years to do.
On a point of order, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Angleston.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I want to invite the member not to personalize the debate, but he can, and it's no problem if he does. No problem, because he's speaking to 10 years. The exercise was not a 10-year exercise. He was the former minister, so he should know that. The people there, his technical advisors would have told him how long it lasted. It was not 10 years. If you want to count that, the Free National Movement had 25 years. That's not how you approach it. The exercise was begun and completed, and it's been abandoned. That's the only point I'm making, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member speaks to the bill being from 1958. And so if the honourable member wants to speak of 25 years that we had, the honourable member would also have to remember 25 consecutive years without interruption. But I will not focus on all the way back there. I'm impressed that the honorable member, and I believe her entire team, holds this Free National Movement government at such a high standard that it is expected that in 2 years we would have done what they didn't do in all of that time. That said, it only adds to every time there is a debate here and something is presented, oh, we were thinking about that. Oh, we were going to do that. Oh, we had this plan. Oh, it was already drafted. The former government seemed to have spent their lifetime with everything in the pipeline. This Free National Movement government is seeking to take things out of the pipeline and bring because for all but one point, the opposition agrees. The opposition agrees that this is a good thing. The opposition takes credit for some preparatory work being done. And the government is not denying the participation and the contribution that the opposition would have made prior to. That's your point. That's your point, Anguston. Allow me to make my point. Yes, it is. That was exactly your point. That was exactly your point. Your point was that you were disappointed. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member made it clear that there is disappointment in the lack of progress in 2 years by comparison to 10 years, 2 non-consecutive terms. And so I say, I thank the honorable member and the members opposite for holding us to such a higher standard to expect that in a shorter period we ought to have done. I just want to say that we are doing. The mere fact that we're having the discussion here today is evidence that we are doing. Here, a few weeks ago we stood here, Exuma. A few weeks ago we stood here and we do the people business. You shouldn't walk out. You should eat when you walk out. A few weeks ago we stood here, Mr. Speaker, and we discussed the amendments to the Road Act to ensure that roads are safe, well paved, potholes fixed, to reduce instances that may result in accident or injury. And on the heels of it, we are here today with these amendments. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Social Services, I want to highlight that while we focus on the statistics that result in fatality and death, Honorable Member for Bamboo Town used some scripture earlier that speaks to how in time families find the strength to get over the death of a loved one. But Mr. Speaker, the injuries that result in permanent disabilities, they don't go away. Those hardships continue to create havoc within those families. And so here we are, trying to minimize and reduce this. Here we are, bringing in amendments that will speak to road safety issues.
Man, you even got Pine Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, Pine Ridge supports this. The opposition supports this. Mr. Speaker, this is a good thing, and I just wanted us to go on our lunch break, all in agreement that this is a good thing. It is good news for the people of our country to ensure that when someone is involved in an accident, especially the persons in our inner cities whose means are limited to ensure that the driver responsible has his insurance available to remedy the damages and the injury. There's a new phenomenon where persons go and they get the insurance, they get the 90-day certificate, they register the vehicle, and then they tell road traffic that I've sold the vehicle and I want my insurance back. And they're driving around with no insurance. I'm sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that the honorable member for Angleton wants to know that if any of her constituents are involved in a traffic accident, the person responsible has the accident to make them whole as much as is possible. Yes. And so if it means that the police officer needs to take that person to the police station and say, call your mommy, call your daddy, call your uncle, let them bring the insurance because I know you have it. Yes, I am a police officer at heart, and I will never, never, ever walk away from that. But as the police officer of 29 years, I spent 29 years of my life attempting to keep this Bahamian population and visitors safe. Yes. And I thank the good people of Southern Shores for affording me the opportunity to come here to continue to keep the people of the Bahamas safe. And so Southern Shores supports this bill that we are satisfied will keep the people of the Bahamas safe.
Are you on a point of order?
Because the member attributed to me certain thinking. He said he's sure I have a certain thinking, Speaker. If the government is concerned about the issue of cars being insured or licensed without insurance or with limited insurance, then you change the law relative to insurance of vehicles. We are talking about the liberty of people and giving police officers, if you have a fender bender, any one of us or people out there, miss and hit someone, back someone's car, could be looking at an arrest by the police because they don't have any insurance papers on them, Speaker. We object to that, Mr. Speaker.
I want to respond. The honorable member in her presentation referred to what's happening in England. Right there next door where we all go to Walmart. We all know if that the hotel is across the road from Walmart, we make sure that our driver's license right next to the credit card. And so if we want to refer to outside jurisdictions, let's refer to the ones that we go to more often.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, on that note, I think we will take our luncheon break. So, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m.
A second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.